gave one of his pens to civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for June 10th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. The rise of the right wing. In European Parliament elections, French and German leaders lose out to supporters for hardline policies on immigration and climate. We'll take stock of the shift. 4 Israeli hostages taken by Hamas were rescued over the weekend, but a key member of the Israeli war cabinet has resigned. And on those ceasefire talks, the U.S. Secretary of State is in the region, joining them to try to push them along. At the U.S. border, we'll get an update on the Biden administration's order that limited migrant inflows, and we'll learn about a new order that might be coming. Plus, the FBI released new crime statistics. Incidents are down, but the numbers require some careful explanation. We'll have an expert who will walk us through those. Crime spiked during the pandemic, and so did supply chain misery. We'll check in on the interdependence of global goods and how things stand now. Plus, a new measure to measure the heat's effect on the body, a conversation with Major Garrett about the presidential race, the jury starts deliberating in Hunter Biden's trial, and Apple makes a late dash into the artificial intelligence race. And finally, a new study suggests elephants have distinct names for each other, which they, of course, always remember. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. The top U.S. diplomat is in the Middle East for his 8th visit since Hamas attacked Israel in October last year. Secretary of State Antony Blinken returned to the region Monday in an effort to increase pressure on both Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire deal in Gaza. Blinken says the plan on the table is, quote, the single best way to get to a ceasefire and release the remaining hostages. And that plan was approved by the United Nations Security Council Monday. Russia abstained from the vote, while the remaining 14 council members voted in favor to support the American-backed ceasefire plan for Gaza. Meanwhile, Benny Gantz, a member of Israel's war cabinet, resigned Sunday. Gantz, a key rival of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has accused the prime minister of mishandling the war effort and putting his own political survival over the country's security needs. The Israeli military rescued 4 more hostages Saturday, 8 months after they were captured by Hamas. And Chris Livesay is in Tel Aviv with more details. Chris?
Well, it was a rescue operation of the highest stakes, with the families of the hostages and the entire country desperate for some good news. And it nearly failed. New footage shows the moment Israeli commandos stormed the apartment building holding the 3 male hostages. Weeks of rehearsing on mock-ups had prepared these elite forces to move in broad daylight. The hostages were codenamed Diamonds, and at one point, a message was relayed over the radio. We have the diamonds in our hands. Then a heavy gunfight erupted, followed by disaster. One of the getaway vehicles broke down. The ensuing battle was fierce. The Hamas-run health ministry says nearly 300 were killed. Israel disputes that number. Our CBS News team in Gaza was at the hospital as the injured arrived. Eventually, with the help of hundreds of Israeli troops nearby and U.S. intelligence, all 4 hostages made it to the beach, taking their first steps of freedom in 245 days as they boarded helicopters to safety. The return has sparked national celebrations and renewed Israelis' faith in their own national security, something that still hasn't recovered since the Hamas massacre and kidnappings of October 7th that started this war. John?
Chris Livesay in Tel Aviv, thank you. The jury in Hunter Biden's federal gun trial started deliberating Monday afternoon after lawyers on both sides gave closing arguments. Prosecutors allege the president's son lied about his drug addiction on a form to buy a gun. He's charged with 3 felonies in connection with the purchase and has pleaded not guilty. Hunter's lawyers argue that while the younger Biden admits bouts of addiction, he was not using drugs when he purchased the gun in October of 2018. If convicted on all 3 accounts, Hunter Biden could face a maximum of 25 years in prison. Violent crime fell 15% in the first 3 months of 2024 compared to the same period last year. That's according to new data from the FBI. The numbers also show that when comparing the first quarters of 2023 and 24, murder fell by roughly 26%, rape by more than 25%, and robbery by 17%. In a statement, Attorney General Merrick Garland acknowledged that this is the second year of significant decreases. He said, quote, "This continued historic decline in homicides does not represent abstract statistics. It represents people whose lives were saved, people who are still here to see their children grow up." Jeff Asher is an expert in evaluating criminal justice data and joins us now from New Orleans. He's also the co-founder of the consulting firm AH Datalytics. Jeff, thanks a lot for being with us. So for starters, help us understand how accurately we should take these FBI crime data when looking at the entire nation.
So with all crime data, you kind of have to take the view that the data is often accurate if imprecise. And that's especially true with 3 months of data that is unaudited, and agencies still have many months before the end of the year to report incidents that they might have missed. So I think a better way to look at it, rather than the specific numbers that the FBI crime report suggests, is to look at the overall direction. And the overall direction shows very large decline in murder and sizable declines in violent and property crime. And we can back some of that up with samples of lots of cities. So we have data from about 260 cities of murder. That's showing about a 19% decline there. We took about 180 cities worth of auto theft data and showed a 15% decline. So it's not just the FBI's numbers, but we have world data that is backing up that we're seeing large declines, even if they're not quite as large as what I think the FBI quarterly data suggests they are.
And Jeff, how should we think about those declines with respect to last year and then with respect to pre-pandemic levels? Because the pandemic plays a role in our understanding of the pace of crime, right?
Absolutely. And there was a 30% increase in murder in 2020, a smaller increase in 2021, a small decrease in 2022. And then last year, we probably had about an 8 to 12%, let's say, decline in murder. We'll find out this October what last year's crime stats were. So if you look at the numbers now, it's plausible that we're kind of see close to double the decline in murder that we had in 2023. We'll almost certainly have a third straight year of declining murder. We should be roughly at or below where we were in 2019 in terms of murder. In terms of violent crime, the spike was not anywhere near as large in 2020. And so we probably had a sizable decline in 2023. If we have another sizable decline in 2024, we're talking about, and I think these are numbers that the president has used, some of the lowest violent crime rates that we've seen since the early 1970s.
And so then as a final question, just help me contextualize that, which you've already done a good job doing, but there's going to be a lot of talk about crime and how bad it is or isn't in this election year. Give us the right way to think about how we should take what our politicians tell us about the story with respect to crime, given what we know now and what we might learn from more data to come.
I think that's a really hard question to answer because there's no inherent right way to look at it. Certainly, crime has fallen a long way since the 1990s. And even with the spike in 2020 and 2021, the violent crime rate and the murder rate was still significantly below where it was in the 90s, still above where it was in 2014 and the pre-pandemic lows that we had seen a lot of those years. And so even if we reach pre-pandemic levels, I think that we'll probably reach that. We've seen a lot of progress. We'll probably have murder rates that are substantially below where they were in the 90s and largely around some of the lowest that we've recorded in 60 years. But you're still talking about 18 or 19,000 murder victims. You're still talking about, in cities like Chicago and New Orleans, where I am, in New York and Philadelphia, large declines in murder, but still hundreds of murder victims. So it's still an issue that needs to be solved and an issue where there's a lot of work to be done, even if the trends are very positive and we can celebrate downward trends and increasing success there.
Jeff Asher in New Orleans. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was very helpful. Donald Trump participated in a virtual probation interview Monday. Last month, Trump became the first former or sitting U.S. president to ever be convicted in a criminal trial. The unanimous jury found him guilty on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records related to hush money payments to adult film actor Stormy Daniels to silence her about an alleged sexual encounter with Trump before the 2016 election. Monday marked another first, a former president interviewing with a probation officer. Trump joined the call from Mar-a-Lago with his attorney so they could review his crimes and personal record to determine what they want to request for sentencing. That's scheduled for July 11th, 4 days before the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, where Trump is expected to accept his party's presidential nomination. With less than 150 days until the election, a new CBS poll shows President Biden and Donald Trump essentially tied in the race for the White House. Both nationally and in battleground states, the two major candidates are virtually even in support. As has been the case for most of the race, the economy, state of democracy, and immigration are major factors in the campaign. What is new is that Trump is now a convicted felon, but the polls shows that hasn't changed voter opinion much. So to help us understand that, CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett joins me now. So a major thing has happened, and yet the polls pretty much feel like they are where they were, or do you see it that way, and what do you make of it?
I don't see it that way, John. I think it's going to take this country a fair amount of time to fully process all of the aspects of a guilty verdict for a former president seeking re-election to the highest office in the land. And just that reader you did a moment ago about a probation hearing and all the manifestations of a former president going on a Zoom call for a probation hearing about preparations for sentencing and what may flow from that. There's now a conversation among public defenders in New York seeking the exact same special accommodations given to the former president for low-income clients. That seems to be a reasonable request, but they're not always given that. They don't get to have an attorney present, or they can't do it via virtual connections. Well, as Americans think about every single stage of this, I believe it is worth imagining that their impressions and how it affects their political choice come November may change over time. It may evolve. And I know pollsters are going to try to find this answer as best they can, but I'm not sure it's going to emerge for a while. And I think this country, at least those who are still up for grabs in terms of their partisan alignment not being so nailed down, Biden or Trump, they're going to evolve with this, and they're going to comprehend it on their own timetable and on their own terms for quite some time.
Another thing that was in the numbers was a shift in reasoning behind why there is support for President Biden. The amount of likely Biden voters who say they will vote for him to oppose Donald Trump has gone up in the past few months. What does that mean? Again, with all the caveats one should add with polling. Nevertheless, what do you think that means for the Biden campaign and how they might reach out to voters?
One of the truisms, John, of this campaign, from my perspective, is there is a symbiotic relationship between Biden and Trump. They both need each other. Trump's rhetoric against Biden far, far more lacerating and aggressive than it was even against Hillary Clinton. Why? Because Biden beat Trump, and he can't stand that. So he's deeply aggressive and deeply aggrieved against Joe Biden, the person, and everything he represents. Similarly, for President Biden, his nomination is reassured and his approach to that nomination guaranteed. No challengers in the Democratic Party, even those possibly well-positioned, even thought of doing it because they thought that Joe Biden, as President of the United States, was the best Democrat to defeat President Trump because he did it previously. And for the Biden campaign, they know they have softness on an issue set of immigration, inflation, maybe some others. What they don't have any softness of, and one thing that rallies their base and lightly attached Democrats and even some independents, is bringing up what former President Trump represents, both now and in his past presidency. And that's something they were relying on a couple of months ago to bring this race closer. They spent a lot of money in that direction. The race is now closer. So you can see that they believe that strategy is vindicated, which means it will be repeated again and again.
So then as a final question, Major, if I can pick up on what you said and fix me if I've got it wrong, but if you're the Biden campaign, you would rather talk about Donald Trump's problems than you would like to talk about immigration, an issue on which Joe Biden has trouble with voters. On the other hand, President Biden has this new executive order about migration How do you think that plays out? And are we seeing anything that would suggest it's playing out one way or the other subsequent to when he's announced this order?
The Biden campaign has made it pretty clear that the sequence is former President Trump is a threat on several different levels. You should be nervous about voting for him. Oh, and by the way, we have these other policies you should be interested with. And immigration is a place where the Biden campaign now says it is responsive to voter concerns. Not as responsive as Trumpist Republicans want him to be. That will never be the case. But responsive enough to, A, have something to say and have Democrats to say when they're questioned about immigration, as inevitably they are in Washington and back home, and in preparation for this debate on June 27th as it is currently scheduled. If that debate goes on, and there are lots of people who wonder whether it will or whether it won't, but if it goes on, President Biden now has something to say in terms of executive action on immigration. Will it satisfy Trump? Will it end all of the criticism? No, but it's responsive. And for the Biden campaign, politically on immigration, they had to do that step because they knew, watching former President Trump after his conviction, what was the first thing he talked about? Not that. First thing he talked about was immigration. They know that's going to be former President Trump's lead card against them.
Major Garrett in Washington. Excellent as always. Thanks so much, Major.
Sure.
A key witness returned to the stand Monday in the criminal trial against New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. Jose Uribe is a New Jersey insurance broker who pleaded guilty in March to bribery charges. Uribe claims he gifted the Democratic senator's then fiancée, Nadine, a new Mercedes-Benz convertible in 2019 in exchange for his, quote, power and influence to stop investigations into Uribe's business associates. Senator Menendez, his wife, and 3 business associates have all pleaded not guilty to more than a dozen federal corruption charges. That includes accepting bribes worth thousands of dollars in cash and gold. The 70-year-old is also accused of acting as a foreign agent for Egypt. His wife will be tried separately as she is being treated for breast cancer. The European Union takes a step to the right. Coming up, we'll look at gains made by far-right groups across the EU and what it means for the 27-nation bloc. Plus, the Biden administration is now trying to protect some migrants, less than a week after it imposed restrictions on those trying to enter the United States at the southern border. Our Camila Montoya Galvez joins us to discuss. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
The European Parliament is the EU's only governing body directly chosen by voters. This past weekend, those voters pulled that body more to the right than it has ever been. Provisional results show Europe's centrist groups maintained their majority, but far-right parties made substantial gains, thanks in large part to Italy, Germany, and France. Right-wing groups performed so well in France that President Emmanuel Macron thought it necessary to call snap elections to reset his own parliament. He told the French people Sunday, quote, "The rise of nationalists and demagogues is a danger for our nation and for Europe. After this day, I cannot go on as though nothing has happened." Sarah Wheaton joins me now from Brussels. She is the chief policy correspondent for Politico Europe. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. So the centrists are still in power, but what does it mean to have a stronger right-wing presence in the EU? And what does it mean in terms of policy? What is that really all about when it comes down to it?
Well, so as you said, the centrists are still in power, but the kingmaker will change. So you used to have a coalition, a bit hard to imagine from an American perspective, but you used to have a coalition of the center right and the center left doing most of the governing, and a truly centrist party was kind of the kingmaker. Now this big center right party is not only the biggest party, but is essentially the kingmaker, and they will be able to some extent choose whether they team up with the far right, with parties associated with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni or France's Marine Le Pen, or if they do decide to team up with the more traditional left. And what we're already expecting is some big dialing back of climate ambitions. So for example, Europe was moving forward with a ban of the internal combustion engine in cars by 2035. And major power players are already saying that they're planning on ending that plan.
And so what's driving that? Is it just purely the economy? And let me throw immigration in there as well. What's driving this response from the voters?
Well, those two things are intertwined. You know, this European Parliament was last elected 5 years ago. We've been through the pandemic, the war in Ukraine. Those things have caused a lot of economic unrest here in Europe. And then on top of that, you have an ongoing migration crisis. And certain parties are able to kind of make a link saying, you know, look, your costs are increasing. At the same time, we're devoting resources to all these people coming in. There's a sense of instability. That's part of it. There is also, I think, just a general sense that, you know, whether it's because of a focus on green initiatives or because of a focus on Ukraine, certain parties have been able to make the argument that this is why prices are increasing. This is why kind of the regular people, especially maybe people outside of the cities, are being left behind.
And Sarah, why has Emmanuel Macron decided to call for these snap elections in France?
He's taking a big risk. Everybody's kind of comparing it to two different things. To step back, he was not on the ballot this weekend during this vote, but his allies lost pretty brutally to Marine Le Pen's party. Her far-right party got basically twice as many votes as Emmanuel Macron's governing party. And so he's sort of calling French voters bluff. He's saying, look, you really like these guys? You want them to help govern? Let's see. So he's giving Le Pen's party essentially 3 weeks to make their case. He's betting that voters will say, actually, no, never mind. We don't really want that. Now, Mr. Macron, let's keep your party in charge. Or some speculate that maybe he's saying, okay, I will share power with Le Pen's party. You can see how much you really like it when the far right governs. Others say, look, you could end up with a Brexit. You could end up with something that you can't really undo. And others also point to the U.S. They say, look, people thought that when they saw Donald Trump, a strong populist leader, actually take power and govern, that they wouldn't like it. But now, indeed, we see President Trump has a good chance to be reelected against President Biden.
So as a final question, Sarah, what is Macron's argument going to be? Will it be, look at how truly dangerous they are, or will it be, you may have wanted to send me a message, you voters, but I can still deliver for you because I'm a competent person on issues X, Y, and Z?
I think he might have a hard time making the latter argument. There's a lot of anger at him in France about efforts to change the retirement age, change the Social Security system. They're not really seeing changes on issues like migration. There's a lot of social unrest in that department as well. And so I think he will indeed need to make arguments about, democracy, about being a part of Europe, and challenging Le Pen and her party's ability to govern.
Sarah Wheaton with Politico Europe. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, John.
4 Russian naval vessels are set to port in Havana, Cuba, Wednesday for military exercises. Cuba says Russia's military presence, including the arrival of a nuclear-powered submarine, does not represent a threat to the region. The country promises none of the vessels will carry any nuclear weapons. The move comes days after Russian President Vladimir Putin suggested he could give weapons to countries hostile towards the United States, after Washington approved Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons to strike inside Russia. It is believed that 272 years ago Monday, founding father Ben Franklin conducted his famous kite experiment. There are a lot of myths about what happened that are historically inaccurate. Franklin was not the first to discover electricity. The phenomenon was already known during the mid-18th century. He was, however, one of the first to link the theory of electrical currents to lightning. Speaking of lightning, Franklin was not struck during the experiment, as historians note that if that had happened, he likely would have died. In his 1767 book, British scientist Joseph Priestley wrote about Franklin's account of the experience. He said that the inventor touched the key and felt some charge, which was likely ambient electrical power from the storm. He also noted the human side of Franklin, writing that he dreaded ridicule if unsuccessful, so Franklin told no one about the experiment but his son. How hot is too hot? We thought we knew the answer, but new research suggests the human body may be more delicate than previously thought. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 Hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here's some additions to our top stories. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel Monday after a short visit to Egypt. He met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, reiterating a proposal that would lead to an immediate ceasefire and more humanitarian aid for Gaza, or that's his sales pitch anyway. The United Nations Security Council backed that same proposal in a vote just hours later. The FBI released its quarterly crime report Monday. The data from the first quarter shows overall violent crime fell 15.2% year over year, with double-digit percentage decreases across several crime categories, including murder and robbery. Attorneys presented closing arguments in the federal gun trial of President Biden's son Hunter on Monday. Hunter ultimately did not testify in his own defense. Several members of the Biden family have been in court almost every day in support, including First Lady Jill Biden. CBS News has confirmed the White House is exploring protections for undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens, less than a week after President Biden signed an executive order restricting asylum seekers at the southern border. According to an immigration advocacy organization, Forward.US, there are an estimated 1.1 million undocumented people in the United States who are married to an American citizen. Several officials familiar with the matter are considering a, quote, parole-in-place program for those individuals. It would give them the opportunity to apply for work visas and then protect them from deportation for a limited time. It would also create an easier pathway for undocumented migrants who want a green card or citizenship. Parole-in-place programs aren't new. They're currently used for families of military members or veterans living in the U.S. And joining us now is CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez. Camila, it's great to have you here to explain that to us. But first, let's go back to the thing we were talking about last week, which is the new order from the Biden administration about migrants and asylum. It's been in place now. What do we know about how it's working or not working?
Sure. So since President Biden invoked this sweeping executive authority, the U.S. has already returned thousands of migrants to Mexico. These are migrants who are either Mexican nationals or migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, the 4 nationalities that are not from Mexico that Mexico is accepting into its territory. The U.S. additionally has sent deportation flights to over 24 countries at this point, including countries like Colombia, Ecuador, and others like Uzbekistan. However, I should underscore that the impact of this order is somewhat limited on countries in the Eastern Hemisphere, countries like China and countries in Africa, because the U.S. has a harder time deporting people there. The first reason is because Mexico does not accept these nationalities back into Mexican territory, but also these countries either limit or reject deportations from the U.S., or it's just simply very time-consuming and operationally impractical to send daily deportation flights to countries like Senegal, China, and other countries.
Let me ask you now about this new discussion about spouses. Where's that coming from, and how should we think about it?
The president, we are told, is exploring another sweeping unilateral action on immigration, and this would be very far-reaching in scope. John, it would be the biggest affirmative immigration relief program since DACA, that program that currently protects the so-called dreamers from deportation and also offers them work permits. This would benefit, rather, the unauthorized immigrant spouses of U.S. citizens, and it would allow them, one, to work in the U.S. legally, two, to also live here legally, but three, and most importantly, to potentially have a new path to green card status and ultimately U.S. citizenship. And that is because under current law, people who enter the country illegally, John, cannot apply for green card status based on a sponsorship from their spouse who is a U.S. citizen. They first have to leave the country and then come back legally and then apply for a green card. But under this proposal, they would be able to stay here, not face a ban from the U.S., and adjust their status to a permanent resident status, and eventually, after a few years, U.S. citizenship. So it would essentially do what Congress has debated on doing for 20 years now, but through unilateral action. So again, it would obviously face legal challenges from Republican-led states who will likely argue that this is an overreach and that it is illegal.
And it would bring them into the system, though, at least, this measure, right? I mean,
yes.
Which has been one of those measures they've been looking for. They would have to submit
evidence that they have been in the country for a certain amount of time, that they have no serious criminal records. They would have to meet other requirements, just like any other petitioners for green card status would have to meet. And so, yes, they would be in the system for the Department of Homeland Security to review their applications.
Camila Montoya Galvez, thanks so much, Camila.
Thanks, John.
We all know climate change is having an effect on our environment. Now it's changing the food on our plate. In West Africa, heavy rain and heavy waves have sent chocolate prices soaring to record levels this year. In Vietnam, the world's second largest coffee producer, a severe drought is hurting bean production, causing traders to hoard coffee. And in Italy, poor weather is affecting grape and olive harvests, leading to a surge in prices for wine and olive oil. Many of these so-called luxury crops, like chocolate and coffee, are concentrated in a couple of regions, so small changes in climate can be felt globally. As summer temperatures begin to surge across the country, many experts will rely on the heat index, which tells us what conditions feel like on our skin, to help issue safety alerts. But as national environmental correspondent David Schechter reports, experts say what we need is a new standard to tell us not how it feels outside, but how much the heat is damaging our bodies.
I'm running inside a lab at Penn State University, where scientists have discovered a sobering new truth. Heat and humidity can be dangerous to our bodies at much lower temperatures than previously thought. How do they know that? Well, it starts with a research subject swallowing a tiny thermometer tucked inside this pill.
Hope they don't need it back.
The pill will record my core temperature as the chamber floods with hot air and humidity.
He said he wants to keep going for another 2 hours.
What Dr. Larry Kenny is looking for are the signs of heat stress on the body's internal organs.
Heat stress is what kills.
Heat stress is what kills. Most of the people who die are over the age of 65. Most of them die, with the exception of homeless who are outdoors, most of them die in indoor environments because of lack of air conditioning.
Breaking news right now, Chicago firefighters are working to cool down a north side apartment building where 3 people were found dead.
Gwen Osborne was a retired newspaper reporter from Chicago. She died during an early heat wave in 2022 when her building did not turn on the air conditioning. Her son, Ken Rye.
After 3 consecutive days of above average temperatures, they decided to do health checks. And when they did the health check of her unit, she had passed.
I'm so sorry about that.
Every now and again it kind of hits you. So, sorry.
For the last 20 years, scientists have had a theory that anything above 95 degrees Fahrenheit with 100% humidity over an extended period was the danger zone. But that theory was never tested on human subjects. What Kenny's research found is the danger zone starts far lower, at 87 degrees and 100% humidity. In a warming climate, that will put more people in danger.
I think we need to look more inward at the human body in terms of how we respond to conditions of high heat and humidity.
There it is.
One of the few places that's happening is the Australian Open tennis tournament, which has tested how athletes respond to extreme heat. The result is a 1 through 5 heat stress scale with recommendations like extended breaks or suspending play. Kinney says a similar scale can be developed for seniors.
That, I think, would be more valuable, more valid, and more reliable in alerting the public.
And, he hopes, give us a better understanding of how truly damaging heat and humidity can be, instead of learning that lesson the hard way.
Your mom being the writer, what would be the headline of this story?
We can do better for our seniors.
And David Schechter joins me now. David, Dr. Kenny has established that we're going to reach this heat and humidity threshold faster than previously thought. What does that mean for communities across the United States?
Yeah. So, John, the number that he established in the story, 87 degrees and 100% humidity, those are miserable conditions. The numbers don't quite sound like that. That is just really miserable. And so far, those conditions do not really exist for a prolonged period anywhere on our planet yet. But as climate change increases our baseline temperatures, and if we don't reverse the trend of climate change, the Midwest and the East Coast will be most susceptible. Those are places that have very humid summers, and they will become more humid as the atmosphere warms, which also means more dangers to human health.
David Schechter in Dallas. Thank you so much, David. The COVID-19 pandemic dislodged the global supply chain, but the vulnerabilities in the system had already been building up for decades. Ahead, a look at potential solutions to fix the system. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking. Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Global supply chains are vital for transporting products and services and are crucial for the world's economy. But 4 years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted the network and caused numerous shortages. A new book titled How the World Ran Out of Everything Inside the Global Supply Chain takes a deeper look at how the health crisis exposed the fragility of a system that was always at risk of collapse. The book also provides an argument for reshaping the supply chain to improve its quality and strengthen it against future crises. The author of that book, Peter Goodman, joins me in the studio. He is a global economics correspondent for the New York Times. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's a fascinating topic. Let me just start with a quote of yours, which is about the period before we all learned the word supply chain and it got all tangled. In a marketplace in which many companies were already making goods in China, the company that failed to do likewise risked distinguishing itself as uncompetitive.
Right.
Describe that environment that created the dependence on China.
Tremendous investment by the Chinese Communist Party, the government, in infrastructure, ports, highways, very high success in getting people educated and skilled to work in factories. And then really a lot of stuff that happened on our side of the Pacific. You know, the imperative by people running publicly traded companies to drop their costs as low as possible. So it was good for consumers. It was good for the investor class. And so they took for granted shipping, which it turns out is an international cartel, as I expose in the book, a largely unregulated cartel. And they put themselves at the mercy of this shipping industry, treating factories in China like they might as well just have been in Ohio or down the street for that matter. It worked out really well until we had shocks, and those shocks got exposed in a big way during the pandemic.
And was this, you mentioned shipping, were people noticing this beforehand and saying, well, this is all working out fine now, but here are these choke points that should we have a problem are going to be a problem?
There have been warnings for years. I mean, I wrote my first supply chain story back in 1999 when there was an earthquake in Taiwan, and some people said, we're making a lot of computer chips there. Maybe we should think about making other places as well. There were shortages. Of course, in 2012, Fukushima nuclear disaster, we had shortages of electronics for months afterwards. It really whacked a lot of companies operationally, and people said similar stuff. There was even a book came out in 2014 that said a pandemic could really hit the global supply chain. But the problem is that the person at a publicly traded company who says, maybe we should diversify, they're going to hit the next quarter's earnings. The executive who says, let's keep doing it the way we've been doing it because that's good for shareholders, they keep their job. And those incentives are still in place today.
So it could only have been fixed through collective action, and there's no body for that to prepare against these problems.
There's no czar of the global supply chain. Right. You know, it's not like we have some system cooked up by wizards who went to the top of a mountain and thought about the most efficient way to do things. We've got this very ad hoc, kind of jury-rigged series of overlapping systems, a lot of deregulation, a lot of kind of cultish reverence for a certain sort of efficiency that was all about lowest costs of doing everything, but didn't account for the costs of running out of ventilators in the middle of a pandemic, of waking up and discovering we're dependent upon Chinese factories for 95% of our personal protective gear. So we got frontline medical workers treating COVID patients without gear because we've really concentrated all of our production in one place, a place, by the way, that we happen to be having a trade war with.
Sure. Tell me about railroads. You also write about that.
Yeah, so I write about something called precision scheduled railroading, which is a fancy way of saying, let's fire lots of people, let's scrap a lot of trains because it'll be good for the investor class. The history of rail in the United States, going all the way back to the robber barons, is the story of investor interests taking precedence over everyone's interest in getting stuff moving. So in the middle of the worst part of the pandemic, I tell the story in the book of this engineer who discovers, I'm actually hauling rail cars going in the wrong direction. I've got cars that are supposed to be going to Oregon with auto parts and chemicals. They're going to California instead. Turns out the rail is so obsessed with giving Wall Street lower dwell time. That's the amount of time that a load of cargo sits in a rail yard, right, that it's better to just attach these cars to wherever the next train is going and sort it out later. So this is, you know, the investor really getting ripped off. This is shippers getting ripped off while we're catering to this very narrow metric.
Now, before I let you go, Peter, what we know it's messed up. Are there fixes, or is there something happening to improve this situation?
Well, shareholders have to wake up to the fact that this kind of efficiency in the short term is not good for companies over the longer term. Consumers can't fix all this. We're busy with our jobs. We're taking care of our children. We're just trying to keep ourselves stocked.
We want prices to be lower, by the way.
We do want prices to be lower, but you know what? Inflation is driven in large part by these supply chain problems. So we're actually paying the higher prices now for the lower prices we've been getting for years, to say nothing of the fact that, you know, if you run out of a ventilator in the middle of COVID-19, you don't get to say, well, at least our share price is high.
Excellent point. Peter Goodman, the author of How the World Ran Out of Everything Inside the Global Supply Chain. The book goes on sale Tuesday. Peter, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, John.
In some ways, elephants are apparently just like us. We'll explain what scientists just discovered with the help of artificial intelligence. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Todd.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Apple has been lagging behind competitors like Microsoft and Google when it comes to artificial intelligence. It's hoping to change that with the introduction of what it calls Apple Intelligence. The new AI tech will be integrated into Apple's suite of applications, including what will become a revamped Siri. The company will be teaming up with OpenAI to integrate ChatGPT into Siri, which will become more conversational for users. This comes after Apple also previewed iOS 18, which will add more customization options to its iPhone home screen. Spectators turned up in Hong Kong for the city's Dragon Boat Festival, but not for maritime activities. Take a look at this stunning drone show captured in the skies above the city. The festival commemorates a popular Chinese official who, under pressure from other officials, jumped into a river thousands of years ago. Some people felt bad and threw dumplings in the river to stop the fish from eating the body. That's why dumplings, seen in the drone show, are a symbol of this festival. The most famous African savanna elephant was named Jumbo. The 19th century circus animal became synonymous with anything large. But Jumbo wasn't what his friends called him. At least that's the suggestion of a new study from the World Wildlife Fund. African savanna elephants, which are critically endangered, have name-like calls for each other, just like humans. Researchers analyzed the low-frequency sound these elephants make. It's called the rumble. And they noticed that certain elephants responded to specific rumble calls from other elephants. Researchers say they still need to determine the context surrounding these calls with more observations in the future. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. We're learning new details about Israel's hostage rescue mission in Gaza as the UN Security Council puts its support behind a plan for a ceasefire to end the war in the region. Plus, right-wing groups make big gains in elections in the European Union. What's behind the increase and what it means for politics in the bloc? And where do President Biden and Donald Trump stand with voters 5 months out from Election Day? We'll look at some new data from our CBS News polling unit. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this.
What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean in
Did any of that make
What
sense?
have you learned?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount.